Swartz. Angela leads the DA Global Black Caucus and also serves on our Global Women's Caucus Steering Committee. Salli serves as DA Deputy Global Counsel for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and also leads our Global Women's Caucus Reproductive Justice Action Team. Please note that we will be gathering questions for our guests from the Zoom Q&A box and on Facebook, where we're streaming live now. So you're welcome to type in your questions as we go along. We'll start with Salli giving a brief overview of the issue. She will also introduce our distinguished guests from NARAL and moderate our discussion after the presentations. Salli, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, our panelists and experts for NARAL. I, as Anne just said, head up the Reproductive Justice Action Team for the Global Women's Caucus in Democrats Abroad. And one of the things that is the most galling, if I may say so, is the lack of freedom that American women have who are living in the United States. So it is my goal, with all the help we can get, to change that. And to do that, we have an action team, and this is part of the work that we're doing. I'd like to shout out to one of our action members, Salli Anne Swartz, who is on today, who was listening to a NARAL webcast and was mentioning that she was part of our group. And our first speaker, or one of our first speakers, called her after the NARAL to get us involved. And that person would be Laura de Palma, Midwest Regional Organizing Manager. As a member of NARAL's organizing team, Laura works to advance reproductive freedom by building the power of NARAL's members and managing organizing programming across Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, which are all game changer states in the Midwest. Laura has a background in community organizing and campaigning. She's originally from Troy, Michigan, and graduated from the University of Michigan. A special thanks to Laura for reaching out to Democrats Abroad and getting in touch with Jacqueline. Laura has gone out of her way to find the two best speakers for this webinar: Jael Humphrey, Counsel and Associate Director of State Legislative Affairs at NARAL Pro-Choice America. She has worked in law firms, clerked for federal judges, and headed the Police Misconduct and Criminal Justice Priority Area at Lambda Legal. That must have been quite a challenge. The National Black Lawyers Association named her to the top 40 under 40 in 2015. Jael was previously on the board of directors for Law Students for Reproductive Justice and Black Women Build Baltimore. She earned a BA from Columbia University and graduated from Yale University with a joint degree in law and a master's in international relations. Thank you, Jael. You're going to tell us all the bad news that we don't want to hear but need to know. Our third speaker will be Christina, well, I'm going to massacre your last name here, Krasinski. How is that? Counsel and Senior Manager of Policy, NARAL Pro-Choice America. As a member of NARAL's Government Relations team, Christina works to advance reproductive freedom at the federal and state levels, including by advocating for NARAL's policy goals to the executive branch and tracking and analyzing policy actions related to reproductive freedom. Christina is originally from Birmingham, Michigan, and graduated from the University of Michigan with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a minor in Gender and Health. Prior to her time at NARAL, Christina earned her JD from the George Washington University Law School and worked in healthcare law and policy. Can you get a better team? Really? And she's going to tell us all about those horrible, horrible laws that the states are enacting and all the bills that are out there that we need to fight against getting enacted. And I just thought I'd tell you, as we speak today, our social media Global Women's Caucus team is putting out an award called the Reproductive Injustice Award that we are going to give to the state, and we have people are going to get to vote, to the worst state in the union for reproductive justice. So I'm going to listen what Christina has to tell us, and perhaps she'll help us give the next award. We're going to try to make this a monthly event. So with that, I think I will leave us to our NARAL team and pass the mic over to whichever one of you wants to speak first. I'm not quite sure I know that, but take it away, girls.
Salli, thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. And it is a real honor and pleasure to be here with you and Democrats Abroad to join in this collaboration and really lift up the incredible leadership and work that you all do around reproductive justice. So my name is Laura De Palma. My pronouns are she and her. Again, I'm the Midwest Regional Organizing Manager with NARAL. For more than 50 years, NARAL has led the fight for reproductive freedom for everybody, including the right to access abortion. We are powered by our more than 2.5 million members from every state and congressional district in the country. We represent the 7 in 10 Americans who believe that every person should have the freedom to make the best decision for themselves about if and when and how to raise a family. The main pillars of our work are abortion access, birth control, fighting pregnancy discrimination, and paid family leave. We organize our more than 2.5 million members across the country to take action and to advocate for policies and help elect reproductive freedom champions up and down the ballot during election years. In 2021, one of our top campaign priorities is fighting to pass the Women's Health Protection Act to codify abortion rights into federal law. Now I will turn it over to my colleague, Christina Krasinski.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. And thank you, Democrats Abroad, for having us. We are so thrilled to be here talking to you wherever you are in the world. And my name is Christina Krasinski, and I am the Counsel and Senior Manager of Policy with NARAL Pro-Choice America. And I am going to just start by talking a little bit about abortion rights at the US Supreme Court and where we are right now. So next term, the United States Supreme Court has announced that they will hear a case called Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. This case is about a Mississippi law that bans abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Mississippi's ban unquestionably violates nearly 50 years of Supreme Court precedent and is a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. It is probably an understatement to say that it is very alarming that the United States Supreme Court has agreed to review an unquestionably unconstitutional abortion ban. There is no path for the Supreme Court to uphold Mississippi's abortion ban without overturning the core holding of Roe versus Wade. Weakening or overturning Roe poses a threat to our fundamental freedom to make personal decisions about our lives and our futures. And there is really no doubt at this point that Roe v. Wade is on the line. Roe v. Wade and access to abortion care are certainly on the line, despite the fact that support for abortion rights is at a record high in the United States. Americans overwhelmingly support reproductive freedom, and 77% of Americans support Roe v. Wade and the legal right to abortion. So how did we get here? A little background about this case that could dramatically change the state of reproductive freedom in the United States. On March 19th, 2018, the governor of Mississippi signed a bill banning abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Just hours later, the Center for Reproductive Rights, on behalf of Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is the only abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi, filed a lawsuit to block this unconstitutional ban. And a federal district court granted emergency relief to block the law just the next day. In November of 2018, a federal district court ruled that the ban is unconstitutional, stating that the state of Mississippi chose to pass a law that it knew was unconstitutional to endorse a decades-long campaign fueled by national interest groups to ask the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade and the legal right to abortion. This decision blocking the law was ultimately upheld by a federal appeals court. Then in June 2020, Mississippi asked the US Supreme Court to review the case. After nearly a year of considering whether or not the Supreme Court would take up this case, in May 2021, the United States Supreme Court announced that it will take up this case next term, which begins in October 2021. And based on the Supreme Court's usual practices, we expect a decision in this case by the summer of 2022, likely in June, but as with all things Supreme Court related, we never really know for sure. As I said earlier, it is incredibly alarming that the United States Supreme Court has agreed to review an abortion ban, particularly in light of the current makeup of the court. Right now, there is an anti-reproductive freedom supermajority on the United States Supreme Court that was solidified by the confirmation of Donald Trump's 3 anti-choice justices, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and Justice Neil Gorsuch. With the confirmation of those 3 justices, there is a supermajority on the Supreme Court that is unmistakably hostile to reproductive freedom and abortion rights. Thanks to the confirmation of these justices, the anti-choice movement believes that the end of Roe v. Wade is on the horizon. And with this anti-choice supermajority, lawmakers at the state level have launched an all-out assault on reproductive freedom. We know that anti-choice politicians have their eyes on their long sought after prize of ending Roe v. Wade and the legal right to abortion and decimating reproductive freedom across the United States. And with that, I am going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Jael Humphrey, to talk a little bit more about the state of reproductive freedom at the state level here in the United States.
Thanks, Christina and Laura and Salli and everyone. I am thoroughly alarmed. Again, Jael Humphrey, Counsel and Associate Director of State Legislative Affairs here at NARAL, and I'm going to talk about the state of play for reproductive freedom in the states. Next slide, please, Christina. So over the last 4 years, the Trump administration has worked in lockstep with anti-choice extremists in states across the country to wage war on reproductive freedom. We don't want to imagine a world without a federal protection for reproductive rights. But if Roe fell tomorrow, 24 states would likely take action to ban abortion outright. In the first 6 months of this year alone, more than 90 restrictions on abortion care have already been enacted, more than in any other year. Next slide, please. So 12 states have trigger laws, which are near total abortion bans that have triggering language for when they will go into effect. The laws say things like, this law will go into effect 30 days or 60 days or automatically if Roe versus Wade is overturned. This year, 2021, Texas and Oklahoma both passed trigger laws. The Texas trigger ban, for example, states that it will go into effect if 1, Roe versus Wade is overturned. 2, the Supreme Court issues any other decision allowing states to prohibit abortion. Or 3, there is a constitutional amendment that allows states to prohibit abortion. The 12 states with trigger bans are Arkansas, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Texas, South Dakota, and Utah. Next slide, please. So there are 9 states that still have pre-Roe bans on their books, or laws that criminalize abortion that were passed before the Supreme Court decided Roe versus Wade in 1973. These laws were invalidated by Roe versus Wade, but they were never repealed. There is some uncertainty about what would happen with these laws if Roe falls, but they could go into effect. The 9 states with pre-Roe bans are Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Michigan, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Texas, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. A little good news is this year with a Democrat trifecta in New Mexico, they were able to repeal their pre-Roe ban, which had been on the books since 1969. the legislature passed the repeal bill, and New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed it into law. But 4 of these states with pre-Roe bans also have trigger laws: Arkansas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Texas. Next slide, please. So more good news, we take it where we can get it, is that in the absence of Roe versus Wade, 21 states in the District of Columbia protect the right to abortion in either their state laws or in their state constitutions. Next slide, please. Of the 24 states, 14 states in DC that are in purple here on this map, have laws passed through their legislatures that protect abortion rights. 12 of these states have passed laws that explicitly permit abortion prior to viability or in the first 2 trimesters, or when necessary to protect the life or health of the pregnant person. In 2020, DC joined Oregon and Vermont to prohibit government interference throughout pregnancy, thus expanding protections for reproductive freedom beyond those offered in Roe versus Wade. The 2020 DC law codifies the right to abortion, contraception, sterilization, infertility treatment, and pregnancy-related care, and protects people who self-manage abortion care, and prohibits discrimination against healthcare professionals. And I'll add here that 2 of these states with statutory protections also have constitutional protections, which are California and Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So 9 states, including California and Massachusetts, protect the right to abortion in their state constitutions. These constitutional guarantees are judicially recognized, meaning that state courts have ruled that provisions related to due process, privacy, liberty, and equality, for example, provide a right to abortion. In 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court recognized that access to abortion was a fundamental right under the state's Bill of Rights. But in January of this year, the Kansas legislature passed a bill to amend the state constitution to rescind these protections. The proposed language of this amendment, which must be approved by Kansas voters, states that there is no right to abortion or required funding of abortion under the state constitution. The question will be placed on the ballot for the primary election on August 2nd, 2022. This year, Iowa also passed a law to move towards amending their constitution to restrict abortion rights. To amend similar to Kansas, Iowa's Supreme Court recognized the right to abortion, but in 2018. To amend the Iowa state constitution, a bill must be passed by 2 consecutive general assemblies and then approved through a ballot initiative by a majority vote, meaning the earliest the question might appear before Iowa voters is in 2024. The 9 states with constitutional protections or state constitutional protections for abortion are Alaska, California, Florida, Iowa, Kansas, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, and New Jersey. Next slide, please. So there are 4 states, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and West Virginia, that have amended their constitution to declare that it does not protect the right to abortion or allow use of public funds for abortion. In addition to the Kansas and Iowa ballot initiatives, there is an upcoming ballot initiative in Kentucky, also in 2022, to get ahead of any court and declare that there is no protection for abortion rights in the Kentucky Constitution. Next slide, please. For now, abortion is still legal in all 50 states. Under Roe versus Wade, there is a federal right to abortion pre-viability. Full stop. Notwithstanding, states have passed pre-viability bans. This year, Arkansas and Oklahoma joined Alabama to pass near total bans on abortion care, which were immediately challenged in court and enjoined. Anti-choice politicians pass these laws intending for them to be challenged. Some states even going so far as to argue in legislative hearings that they want their state law to be the one to overturn Roe. This year, 2021, Montana passed a 20-week ban on abortion care, and 4 states, Idaho, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Texas, passed 6-week bans, or bans on abortion care at about 6 weeks. Texas's 6-week ban, SB 8, which isn't scheduled to go into effect until September 1st, is particularly egregious. Rather than relying on the state for enforcement, this novel law grants almost any person, even a stranger, the power to sue someone for aiding and abetting a person who is seeking abortion care. And there are several states that have more than one time-based ban. Mississippi, for example, in addition to the 15-week ban passed in 2018, as Christina told us, that is the subject of the pending Supreme Court case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, passed a 6-week ban the next year, 2019, which, like the 15-week ban, is currently enjoined as litigation proceeds. It is extremely important that we ensure that every person who needs an abortion knows that it is still legal until it isn't. Next slide, please. But abortion rights have never been the full story. A formal right to abortion care is one thing. Access is another. The access meter here is from our Who Decides report, which you can find online, and reflects the state of access on the ground at the beginning of the year. There is increasingly limited access to care. Christina said that Mississippi only has 1 abortion clinic left in the state. There are 5 states that have only 1 abortion clinic in the entire state, making access to abortion that much more challenging as people have to travel great distances to access the care they need. There are mandatory delay laws in 26 states that require those seeking abortion care to wait up to 3 days after their initial, often biased, counseling before they can access care. 16 states force pregnant people seeking abortion care to undergo an ultrasound before they can receive care, even when it's not medically necessary. New Hampshire became the latest state to pass a forced ultrasound law in June. And attacks on telemedicine and medication abortion are growing. This year alone, 8 states passed restrictions targeting medication abortion. Other examples of restrictions on abortion care include insurance coverage bans, laws requiring young people to notify their parents before they can obtain abortion care, biased counseling laws, clinic shutdown laws, sometimes called targeted regulations of abortion providers or TRAP laws, and laws that allow someone to deny reproductive health care to someone else based on a religious or moral objection. Anti-choice lawmakers have enacted these web of restrictions, trying to make abortion care difficult, if not impossible, to access. Each restriction amplifies the harm, working to increase patients' logistical, financial, and legal barriers to care. Next slide, please. Although Roe still stands, the reality is that its promises have long gone unfulfilled for many in this country, the United States. Because of restrictions on abortion care and coverage, many people are unable to access the abortion care they need. These burdens disproportionately fall on those already facing the most significant barriers to accessing care, thanks to systemic racism and structural inequities. And I will pass it back to Christina for some hope.
Thank you, Jael, I think, for that very alarming and infuriating overview of the state of abortion access in the United States right now. So as Jael mentioned, I am here to at least offer you some action items. So the Women's Health Protection Act. Given the Supreme Court's decision to take up this case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, as well as the current dire state of abortion access in the United States described by JL, this really underscores the need for Congress to pass a bill called the Women's Health Protection Act, which would protect the right to abortion throughout the United States. The Women's Health Protection Act is federal legislation led by Senators Richard Blumenthal and Tammy Baldwin in the United States Senate, and Congresswomen Judy Chu, Lois Frankel, Ayanna Pressley, and Veronica Escobar in the US House of Representatives. The Women's Health Protection Act would protect the right to abortion throughout the United States by creating a right for healthcare providers to provide abortion care and a corresponding statutory right for people to receive that care, free from medically unnecessary restrictions that single out abortion from other healthcare procedures and block access to care, as well as free from abortion bans. Critically, this right would stand even if Roe fell. Though the right to abortion is currently constitutionally protected at the federal level, anti-choice politicians seeking to advance their agenda of power and control have passed hundreds of state-level restrictions and bans on abortion that have made abortion care extremely difficult to access for many people. As Jael mentioned, the right to abortion is only real and meaningful if you can access the care you need when you need it. The people most hurt by abortion restrictions are those who already face many barriers to accessing the healthcare that they need, including women, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, people working to make ends meet, members of the LGBTQ community, immigrants, young people, people living in rural communities, people with disabilities, and many others. Ending these barriers to accessing care must be part of our fight for reproductive freedom and racial and economic justice in the United States. Every day without congressional action means that more and more people are being denied access to abortion and the ability to make decisions for themselves and their families free from political interference. Passing the Women's Health Protection Act is a critical step towards creating a world where everybody, whoever they are or wherever they live, is free to make the best decisions for themselves, their families, and their lives. It is absolutely critical that Congress pass the Women's Health Protection Act before Roe falls or abortion rights and access are further undermined in the United States. So, members of Congress absolutely need to hear from reproductive freedom supporters just like you. Congress can and must protect the right to abortion and improve access to care by passing the Women's Health Protection Act. And we have a call to action link here, which I think will also be shared in the chat, where you can send a message to your representatives and senators urging them to support the Women's Health Protection Act. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Democrats Abroad.
Fabulous, just fabulous. Does anybody, Jed or Laura, would you like to chime in, or would you, in reaction to any of your other panelists' presentations, or would you like us to continue and I'll wait for the questions to come in? Any off-the-cuff comments on what your other panelists said, or how do you feel about that?
I'm happy to continue. Thank you, Christina, for giving us that action that we can do. It's really important, and I hope that WIPA passes so we can have a federal statutory protection so that all of the state laws do not go into effect.
Yes. I would say the same thing. We'll go back to the NARAL call to action in a minute at the end of the call, because it's the best thing ever invented by IT people. All you have to do is click and it will direct a message directly to your own, depending upon what address you put in, For those of you who are DA members and live abroad, you just have to put in your voting address and it will be directed to your congresspeople, so you don't have to search for their emails online. Okay, so with that, I thought I would present some good news for those of you who don't live in the United States, unfortunately. And I will do that now. Here we go. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, thank you. Part of the reason that DA and NARAL have decided to work together is there was a feeling on both sides that perhaps, and it's a big perhaps, the examples of what's going on in Europe would be helpful to help the lobbying that NARAL does. We were asked to present a general landscape of what's going on in Europe. Now, not every American woman can move to Europe to get an abortion, but I think this is an example of what's available. So of the countries that are, Europe, by the way, is a very large definition. As a lawyer, I hesitate to say that I have not used the definitions that are legal, have legal standing. This is not the European Union, which you will see when I start listing the countries. It is generally what we call continental Europe. And what we call abortion on request is basically if a woman is in distress and wants to have an abortion, depending upon, of course, the specific state that she lives in, it means that she will most likely be able to get an abortion. And access, of course, is very important. Most of the country, well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of these countries, as you see when we go down the list, have what I think the Americans stupidly would call a socialist medical system, meaning it has a medical system that works for the citizens and inhabitants of the state, which everyone contributes to, as opposed to a only private system. So here we go, abortion on request. You can see there are a number of countries here, meaning I'm not going to read them out to you because I hope you can see them. Sorry?
You didn't share your screen, just as a reminder.
Oh, I didn't?
No.
Well, that was pretty dumb of me. Let me try that again. Partager l'écran, partager. Is that better?
It's coming, yes.
Thank you, Angela. You will keep me on the straight and narrow. Okay, apologies for that. So here is the list. Oops. Here is the list of the countries where abortion is what we request, meaning you still have to find a doctor, an abortion clinic. But as you'll see later in my presentation, a lot of them have certain restrictions, but none of them will prevent you from getting an abortion. We have Albania, Armenia, Austria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we were talking about Norway the other day. Yeah, there are certain restrictions. The same with France. But if you really want an abortion and you've gone early enough in the course of the pregnancy, you will get an abortion, and it usually is either free or not expensive at all. And what's really interesting to me is Finland and the UK, for example, as does France, but I couldn't repeat everything, permit abortion on what we call broad social grounds, such as sexual assault. And most importantly, you do not have to prove that you were assaulted. You don't have to go to the police. You don't have to file a report. In some countries, you might get some counseling, but it will not prevent you from having an abortion. Your word is good enough for the medical facilities that are available, which I think is really important because, you know, I just read an article on women in Egypt, and they end up getting raped when they go report violence against them. So there are many countries where at least the judicial system works better than that. Okay, so The next slide is just continuation of this discussion. Only several countries have highly restrictive abortion laws, and no abortions are so restrictive that it's getting towards the United States. But, you know, these are very itty bitty states. I mean, Andorra, you're next door to France. Malta, okay, it's an island, but you can get off of it. San Marino is so small, you drive through it and wouldn't even know it existed. So, you know, I don't know how many people are carrying passports of San Marino, but I don't consider that you're trapped in San Marino. Liechtenstein, okay. Monaco is a surprising one, but again, it's right next to France, right over the border, and there's no border restrictions, so you can just drive there. Poland's been a problem. I think you've all seen in the news the Polish women on the streets, and it is a problem. And the Faroe Islands has a restrictive law, but since the Faroe Islands are part of Denmark, and since Denmark has abortion upon request, it's a problem. Of course, it's a problem, but it's not a major problem like Mississippi or Arkansas or, dare I say, Texas. Now, in terms of types of restrictions, some European laws do set time limits, and they are broadly, I mean, I'm not going to go through every 39 of them, but they're broadly between 18 and 24 weeks. Some of them set the limit around the first trimester. However, you can usually get an abortion at a later time in the pregnancy if the woman's life is at risk, or if, as in the case in France, for example, she is having grave psychological issues, and that can happen. So I think late-term abortions are not something any of us would encourage or would like, but they are possible. And many of the laws recognize that very rigid time limits can have very harmful impacts. To the best of my knowledge, and that's a big carve out for those who are lawyers, I do not know of any heartbeat laws anywhere in continental Europe. But okay, there are 15 countries that require a mandatory waiting period. It depends on what country, but you know, it can go from 1 to 3 days. And generally speaking, that is considered to undermine access and restrict the practicality of access. 12 countries require mandatory or require you to receive mandatory information from their doctors or from what I would call other types of medical clinics, including Planned Parenthood. And some countries require prior authorization from parents, guardians, doctors, or official committees, which, Christina, I think you're listening in, apparently is the case in Norway. Even in France, there was a big, I'm talking about France because I know that law the best because I've lived here for 42 years. But even in France, a minor can end up getting an abortion even if her parents don't agree. It just is a little bit more administratively cumbersome. But there's help to walk kids, women, teenagers through the process. There's been studies done on what restrictions do. And as you can probably imagine, unintended pregnancy rates are the highest in countries that restrict abortion access and are lowest in countries where abortion is broadly legal. It makes good sense. If it's an unintended pregnancy and you don't want to keep the baby, you can get an abortion. These figures, by the way, come from the Guttmacher site, which has all kinds of different statistics, anything you could possibly want to know about abortion worldwide. They have statistics on it. In one of the things that they say is that in analysis that exclude China and India, which granted is not very helpful, but apparently that skews the data, the abortion rate is actually higher in countries than those do not. And in countries that restrict abortion, the percentage of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion has increased during the past 30 years from 36. This includes, by the way, the United States, to 50% for an unintended pregnancy that ends in abortion. Here you have an overview of the international studies that have been done. This covers, as you can see, I hope you can see it, low-income countries, middle-income countries, and high-income countries. Those, by the way, are definitions by the World Bank. We didn't make those up. And so you can see that higher income countries have lower abortion rates. And you can also see the percentages of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion. I don't know if this is graphic speaks to you, but I think it's kind of interesting that overall, the more restricted the laws are, the more unintended pregnancies there are, which is not something that is good for women, especially women that don't have access to childcare, family leave, and the social net that exists in many European countries, but certainly does not exist in the United States. And here's my last slide. This is abortion worldwide, where abortion is broadly legal and where it's restricted. And you can see that the unintended pregnancy rate is much, much higher where it's very restricted. So with that, our reproductive justice team does a lot of work. We have in the past had call storms and letter writing. When the Ohio bill came out, we were very concentrated on getting our Ohio voters to send letters to their Congress people, state legislature, to prevent this. The Ohio bill at the time created the death penalty, believe it or not, for abortion. And it was a bit like the Texas law, because anybody that was involved in abortion could be sued criminally and pursued criminally. So it was a terrible law, and it still is. And if you would like to join our team, just send an email. I will get that email, so you'll know who you're sending it to. And we do try to educate and help people become educated on the issues. So if you go to our website, democratsabroad.org, Women's WC, which stands for Women's Caucus, Reproductive Justice Action Team, you'll see all of the great stuff that we're doing. And with that, I will end my presentation. And I think, unless Anne feels differently, we can start monitoring the chat box and asking our NARAL panelists. And of course, if a question comes to me, I'm happy to answer it, but I think our experts here will probably have the most. I think I would like to ask the question from Jacqueline Swartz. Again, she's in California. And took the time to call in, and she was instrumental in putting Laura together with Democrats Abroad. And I think one thing we'd like to hear about is the status of the Women's Health Protection Act. I mean, where is it? Where is it going? And I guess I'd add, what can we do to help? And I don't know which one of you would like to answer that. Christina's raising her hand. Go ahead, Christina.
Yes, thank you. It's an excellent question. So the Women's Health Protection Act has recently been reintroduced in this current Congress in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the United States Senate. The bill currently has 185 co-sponsors in the U.S. House of Representatives. For those of you keeping track at home, bills need at least 218 votes to pass. So we are on our way. And in the United States Senate, the bill currently has 47 co-sponsors, and recently had a very successful hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where we heard from constitutional scholars as well as medical doctors and an individual who told their own abortion story that was incredibly powerful. So that is the current status, and we look forward to further action from Congress to advance and ultimately pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which is why it is so critical that your members of Congress hear from you that they must support passage of the Women's Health Protection Act before Roe falls, should Roe fall, and before there are any additional attempts to undermine abortion access in the United States.
So Christina, do you think it's going to pass?
I'm hopeful, but
Okay.
I'm out of the prediction making game, but I
Okay,
am hopeful,
fair enough.
I am hopeful that if your Congress people hear from you, I mean, it really does make a difference. And we know that the anti-choice movement is very active and vocal when it comes to contacting their representatives. So it is really important that your representatives hear from folks that support reproductive freedom and support the Women's Health Protection Act.
There's two related questions in the chat box. So if you will allow me, I will continue on with those. From Jacqueline Swartz, who through my mouth raised the original question, which is, would the Women's Health Protection Act serve to override state laws? And Christina, who sits on our steering committee and who sits in also Norway, says, if Roe fails and the Women's Health Protection Act is passed, will this open more legal battles? I was wondering if you would like to take the two of them together. And after that, we'll move on to you, Carrie, because I see your questions.
I'll let Christina take this one too.
Sure, I am happy to take this one as well. So to the first question, the short answer is yes. So what the Women's Health Protection Act would do is create a federal right for providers to provide abortion care and for individuals to receive abortion care, which would override medically unnecessary restrictions at the state level that single out abortion and treat it differently from other healthcare procedures. And it would also override these abortion bans that Jael spoke about earlier in the presentation. So it's really critical. It would create a national standard that would really be important for improving access across the country. And then to the second question, sort of as I mentioned, I am out of the prediction making business, but I would not be surprised if there were further legal challenges. But I think we will have to cross that bridge if we come to it.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I'm just glancing around to see if there are any related questions so we can drive you completely insane and keep asking the same question. Let me, we have a participant, Carrie and Baker, and Carrie has asked two questions, so I will ask them on her behalf. The first one is, how common is self-managed abortion with the abortion pill in Europe? I don't know. I think that's probably an ask to the US, because I know in Europe, in most countries, it's pretty easy to get the abortion pill. You can usually get it in pharmacies. Carrie's second question is, why is unintended pregnancy rates higher in countries where abortion is restricted? And she says, is that because contraception is restricted too? And I guess that's the answer, but let's ask our experts. Which one of you would like to take Carrie's first question? How common is self-managed abortion with the abortion pill? In Europe, it's very common, Carrie. I don't know where you're sitting, like where you live, but it's very common with the exception of Poland, for example. But it's extremely common. I mean, I remember when my daughter was in high school in France, you could get it at the school infirmary. So, but I don't know if that's your question. Do you want to comment on that, Christina?
I'll comment on it briefly and then pass it to Christina. So medication abortion, the use of it, and self-managed abortion care is growing increasingly common in the United States. I mentioned that 8 states this year passed laws restricting telemedicine and the use of medication abortion. So it is something that the antis are aware of and are trying to prevent from happening. And there's also some inflation between medication abortion and the morning after pill. I'm going to pass it to Christina, who can comment, I think, on the FDA and the regulations. Really helpful.
Sure. And in terms of, so I'll back up a little bit. Just the Guttmacher Institute, which Salli mentioned, has excellent data on abortion around the world. According to their most recent data, which is from 2017, about a third, a little more than a third, 39% of all abortion care in the United States is provided through medication abortion. That being said, access to medication abortion is still rather restricted in the United States because the Federal Food and Drug Administration imposes medically unnecessary requirements on mifepristone, which is one of the 2 medications used in a medication abortion regimen. And those restrictions include a prohibition on sending mifepristone through the mail, so through a mail order pharmacy. The Food and Drug Administration also prohibits providing mifepristone at a retail pharmacy. So instead, you have to travel in person to a clinic or to a doctor's office or to a hospital in order just to pick up the pills that you can take at home, the medication that you can take at home. They also restrict who can provide medication abortion. So only what are called certified prescribers who have gone through a sort of burdensome certification procedure can provide medication abortion care right now in the United States. That being said, there is some positive development on that front. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Food and Drug Administration actually announced that they will not enforce that in-person dispensing requirement. Exactly. So recognizing that forcing people to travel in person just to pick up a medication that they will then take at home exposes people unnecessarily to risk of infection of COVID-19. And the Food and Drug Administration has also announced that they are currently reviewing all of the restrictions on mifepristone to evaluate whether they should be lifted in light of current evidence about the safety and efficacy of mifepristone and medication abortion care. So there is some good news on that front, and we're hoping that the Food and Drug Administration will really follow the science and the evidence that supports that medication abortion is overwhelmingly safe and effective for ending an early pregnancy.
That's right. I love that good news. But I'll just add, like, the rash of bills that we're seeing at the state that are attacking access to medication abortion are like, one, we see bills that are prohibiting the use of telemedicine on the state level. So still requiring in-person doctor's appointments. There have been bills introduced to require ultrasounds before medication abortions. We see still the bias counseling and the waiting periods, and also restrictions limiting in-person dispensing of medication abortion to physicians only, as opposed to advanced practice practitioners who are qualified and trained to do it. So while there is progress under the Biden administration at the federal level and progress in a lot of states, there are also a lot of attacks on the state level, which is
it seems like every time we have a window of good news, the crazy people are out there finding a way to nix that possibility. What about Carrie's second question? Would you like me to repeat it? She asked, why are unintended pregnancy rates higher in countries where abortion is restricted? And she asked, is that because contraception is restricted as well?
So it's an excellent question. And again, I would encourage you to look to the Guttmacher Institute, who is really an excellent source for all of this data. But just at a top line level, yes, often countries that severely restrict access to abortion care restrict access to modern contraceptives, which naturally increases the unintended pregnancy rate when folks don't have access to the contraception services that they want and need.
Yeah, I mean, when they start closing down Planned Parenthood clinics, how are you supposed to get birth control, you know? And that is true in many of the countries that I refer to where abortion is very, very restricted. I mean, you have to have a way to get birth control to avoid pregnancies, right? It's kind of like a big duh, but like I said earlier, they'll get us one way or the other. Okay.
So true. Can I add to that
sure, of course.
A second? I think that's right. And in the United States specifically, like the anti-choice activists are also pushing against access to birth control. And there have been several recent Supreme Court decisions which restrict access to contraception in a way that is alarming. And it also goes to all of these like rash of incremental laws that just chip away at access. They all work together. Right. So like the mandatory delays, all of them, the restrictions on accessing contraception are all part of the web of restrictions that lead to a higher rate of unintended pregnancies.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions that I'd like to summarize. Who the hell is doing this to us? Okay, so one comes from Meredith Wheeler that says, is opposition to birth control equally crazy and negative in the quote unquote backward American states? And is all the Christian, who is it the Christian right pushing this? And is it being weaponized by Tea Party types? I had a question that goes along that is like, why are American women putting up with this? Perhaps you wouldn't mind speaking to that sort of political end of this, like who and what groups are taking our rights away, and how do we fight that? What are the most effective ways of stopping this, I like to say, tsunami of attacks against women's medical and reproductive rights? So which one of you would like to take that? Just jump right in. Not an easy question, I know, but it's out there to be talked about.
Well, I'm happy to start, and then Laura and Jael, please feel free to jump in. So Great. I think, our research team has done quite a lot of work on this front. And in terms of a historical view, the right-wing movement in the United States, a little after the mid-20th century, I think realized that school segregation, for example, was not a winning issue for them. And they needed to find a new sort of tip to their sword to maintain this overall agenda of power and control over women, over folks of color, over people in the United States who have historically been excluded from the halls of power. And that new tip to the sword was abortion rights. And so there has been, ever since Roe was decided in 1973, this long-term strategy to fill the federal courts with anti-choice judges who are extremely hostile to reproductive freedom, as well as pass laws at the state level that really chip away at access and rights. And that has been a decades-long strategy that has gotten us to where we are now. And I think despite the fact that we know 77% of Americans support the legal right to abortion, that smaller percentage that opposes abortion rights is quite loud. And so I think it's really critical that your elected officials hear from folks that support reproductive freedom, and that folks, turn out to ensure that we have people that support reproductive freedom in positions of power in the United States. So I will stop there and let Jael and Laura add anything else that they have to add here.
I can jump in really quickly and sort of add to that, Christina, around that long-term strategy being propped up by a disinformation campaign wielded by the right. And just so thinking about both the strategy to take power and to fill the courts and to chip away through state level legislation, et cetera, backing that with a strategic messaging campaign that promotes and disseminates disinformation about reproductive health care.
Yeah, that's right. And I just put in the chat the website for The Lie That Binds, and wanted to lift up this book in the incredible podcast. Like, it's so good. I've recommended it to all my friends. It's a 6-part series that really delves into this question in a lot of detail. I already said this, but it's really good. And yeah, so I lift that up and I recommend that.
Well, that would answer a question that Marnie, who's a steering committee member as well, asked. She says, what are some of the best ways to respond to alternative facts? I mean, how can we raise the level of the noise so that we're the ones they're hearing and not, excuse my term, it's not very judicial, we're legal, all the crazies out there that are torturing women. Is that your answer to read that book? I mean, I know NARAL, how do we broadcast NARAL's messaging? In addition to clicking on the link, which, Angela, could you put that back in again and again and again? Any suggestions for those of us who are out of the country? I mean, we can't go sit in front of the Supreme Court, although in connection with the ERA, there are people out there talking, contesting the archivist that refuses to register the ERA. But thank you. How do you feel about that? How can we broadcast our message and respond to negative facts, as Marnie says?
I'm going to let Laura take this one because she's done more of the disinformation work and I think can speak to this.
Super great question. Love this question. And I just want to respond by saying, again, one of the ways their long-term strategy has been propped up is by spreading and disseminating disinformation because they are trying to win the battle of the public narrative. And so I think one thing we can do in terms of taking action and stopping that is to essentially fight disinformation, particularly over social media. So I think one of the things we can tangibly do is not repeat and amplify disinformation. So if you're on social media and you see disinformation, not to repost or reshare it, even to call it out, rather post proactive, accurate information about reproductive health care and freedom as one way to sort of combat the spread of disinformation online and over social media.
Well,
I'd like to interject a request, if I could. In years past, and comment on that, Laura, in years past, NARAL has been wonderful at providing talking points and a little bit of training. I remember years ago some interesting role plays that you provided to groups like ours on how to talk to people about these issues and the do's and don'ts, exactly the kind of thing that Laura just mentioned. And I would really love to work on some of those materials and spread them around our group too. Do you have that kind of thing on tap and ready to go?
I can respond briefly. The first thing we could do is share out the disinformation fact sheet, which is a super helpful tool. I think that can support with some of the questions and the things you're looking for in terms of training. So I think that's one piece. Christina and Jael, did you have anything else there?
I think the other piece, and we were going to get to this a little later, and I'll let Laura talk about it a little bit, is that I would encourage folks, if you are available, to attend our activist summit, which I think will touch on this as well.
Tell us about that, okay?
That sounds really exciting. I'm going to be there. Please tell us more. Go ahead.
Laura, do you want to talk a little bit more about the activist summit?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Christina. That's a super great action that everyone here can take. Our activist summit this year is on Saturday, July 31st until Sunday, August 1st. It's a coming together for activists and members and allies and partner organizations to come together across the country and the globe to really get trained up and harness certain skills that would enable us to build a strong messaging campaign and lobby members of Congress to take action on the policies and issues we're advancing. So there'll be a series of trainings during the Activist Summit, as well as opportunities to connect with other activists and repro freedom champions. I am happy to share out both more information and a link to register to that.
Yeah.
Laura, will this be recorded for those of us around the world who are at very strange time zones? Will there be any materials available afterwards?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe yes to the recording, so we can share out that recording for folks that can't make it or are in a different time zone. And we will make available some of the materials moving out of that activist summit. And so any follow-up materials we have, we'll be more than happy to share.
Oh, thank you.
And I can add just briefly that our messaging department does phenomenal messaging trainings, and Christina and I are in the government relations department, so we benefit from them. But I will share this resource, which came out recently about messaging from NARAL. It's publicly available.
That would be great. And also, if it's okay with NARAL, Anne, I think we'll get it up on our webpage and ask, is registration open, or is there some triage that goes on, or can anyone join?
Absolutely. I will drop a link for all of you so that you all can register.
That would be great.
Wonderful.
Okay, we have a question about the Supreme Court from one of our, again, steering committee members, and Carol Moore, who is in Florida, but normally lives in London. She wants to know if adding justices is on the agenda or radar of the administration. So Christina, you want to take that, and I'll add what I know onto that afterwards?
Sure. So the short answer is that court reform is on the radar of the administration. Back in early April of this year, President Biden issued an executive order that established a presidential commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. And this is a bipartisan group of scholars, legal scholars, as well as scholars of history and political science, as well as former federal judges and attorneys that practice before the Supreme Court and advocates for democracy reform at large. Are members of this commission that is tasked with sort of evaluating the landscape of what's out there in terms of court reform proposals, and issuing a report 180 days from when the commission was established, so sometime late this year. The commission does have public meetings if anyone is interested in attending. Their next public meeting is on July 20th from 8:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. And it's conducted virtually. So I can post a link to more information about that in the chat if folks are interested. I mean, we are certainly watching with great interest all of the various proposals out there regarding changes at the Supreme Court.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, I just would like to add on to that two things. A reminder to everyone that the number of Supreme Court justices is not in the Constitution. So Congress, which has in the past changed the numbers, can do it again. That's my first just little, let's all remember that. And my second comment is very cynical, but I'll share it anyway. Those who know me know I'm a cynic. The best way to stop anything from happening is to create a task force. And that my opinion is that Biden and the administration did that so that people would just stop talking about it, and that the recommendations will probably be at best vanilla ice cream, and at worst, or not worse, but we'll probably come up with something along the lines of, we agreed to disagree. There is nothing we want to recommend in particular, but you know, you never know. I know Justice Breyer has written extensively on whether or not the Supreme Court, whether he thinks the Supreme Court should be increased in number or decreased in number for that matter. And for those of you who are interested in his views, he voiced them in what's called the Scalia Lecture, which took place at Harvard Law School in April, and it's on YouTube. It's a 2-hour lecture, but since it's on YouTube, you can stop it and, you know, fast forward it and do whatever you want. But his opinion, for what it's worth, and it's certainly worth more than mine, is that that would politicize the court. And as we all remember, there have been court packing attempts in the past, and it never really happened for those who wanted to pack the court to get legislation through, such as Roosevelt, if I'm not mistaken. So, okay. There's another question from Marnie. There's one from Anne. We have 15 minutes left, so I'll ask them quickly. Marnie wants to know, from what demographic groups does the most active support for the protection of reproductive rights come? And have COVID restrictions had an impact on student activism? And Ann O'Connell has asked a really great question. And by the way, shout out to my team. Has been doing all the research that Giles shared with us on which states are doing what and why. Well, not why, we know that. She said, and she says, with the new Texas law deputizing individuals in terms of their ability to sue any persons aiding and abetting abortions, how are they going to prove damages? And I think the question to that is this a criminal? I think it's a criminal complaint that would happen as opposed to a civil complaint. But why don't one of our experts speak to that? So those are the two questions left in our chat room, I believe, although there is an anonymous one. Why don't you take those two on and we'll see where we are on time.
So I can take the first question and hand it to Jael about Texas.
Wonderful.
She's really the expert there. So I will delve a little bit deeper and circle back with more demographics information, but in terms at least of geographic demographics and support of reproductive freedom, we do know that there is no state in the country where banning abortion is popular. In every single state in the United States, the majority of people oppose banning abortion and support the legal right to abortion. And that is consistent with the national numbers that 77% of Americans support the legal right to abortion in Roe versus Wade. So that is a little just tidbit about the geographic breakdowns, and then I can circle back with more demographic information later.
It's like an answer the question about Texas and SB 8. But first, just taking a step back, Texas legislature has been out of control this year. And the Democrats walked out in order to stop an anti-voting rights bill from passing. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, the governor Ducey called a special section, not Ducey. Yes, Ducey. Sorry. he called a special, Governor Abbott called a special session in Texas, and they went back in. A bill was introduced yesterday to ban medication abortion. And there is a hearing happening today on this bill. So they're moving very quickly, like they're not done yet. So in addition to SB 8, I mentioned Texas passed their trigger ban this year, and in their trigger ban, SB 1280, they also clarified that the pre-Roe ban, which was on the books, has never been repealed very explicitly. And then the law that you're asking about is Texas SB 8, and that is the law that bans abortion at about 6 weeks of pregnancy. And I'll mention here, I know, Salli, when you were discussing, you referred to a heartbeat ban, and some people are calling it that, but that is an inaccurate term. And because there is, like, the heart develops much later. And so it's cardiac activity that could potentially develop into a heart, but there is no organ such as a heart around that time of 6 weeks is when these bans take place, which is before most people know they're pregnant. And so we refer to them as 6 week bans, or bans that bans an abortion at about 6 weeks of pregnancy. So this Texas law, SB 8, the 6 week ban, it's not a criminal law. It calls for civil enforcement, and that's what makes it unique and actually difficult, challenging to for brilliant lawyers who are trying to figure out how to challenge this law before it goes into effect again on September 1st. Most laws use the government to enforce it, and so before they go into effect, a plaintiff, typically a provider, can sue the government to have the law enjoined or not go into effect. This law, and I've heard it be described as evil genius, has the civil enforcement mechanism. It calls for $10,000 worth of statutory damages, and then also the risk for anybody who aids and abets someone seeking abortion care. So that could include the Uber driver who gives a pregnant person a ride to the clinic, could be sued for aiding and abetting and be sued for civil damages for $10,000. And of course, the provider or the receptionist who books the appointment or whomever. And then other penalties under this law are the loss of the license for the provider, and then the threat that the clinic itself may be shut down. And so, but again, the law is not enforced by the government. It is anybody, regardless of whether they know the person or not, can sue under this law. So I know, like, the Center for Reproductive Rights is leading a legal team who is working on challenging this law, and we are supporting them and standing behind them to do whatever they can to make sure that people in Texas can continue to access abortion care. And again, this law isn't scheduled to go into effect until September 1st, so stay tuned.
Maybe they'll change their mind. No, I'm kidding. All right. Angela had a few questions she wanted to ask, and before we sign off, I want to know how we can help. Okay, how can Democrats abroad, the Global Women's Caucus, help fight the good fight? What kinds of actions? I mean, I know you mentioned, you being the three panelists, the royal you, writing to our Congress people and posting on social media. Are there any other things, if you think that we can help? I hope you will let us know. Angela, do you want to take over the mic now that I accidentally posted to everybody?
You probably meant Anne, not me, but I do have a question. It seems to me that there are many women who are, fighting all of these abortion laws, but there are way too many women and men who are sitting back passively. What's something simple that everyone can do to support abortion rights? To make it seem like it's not just the anti people who have opinions.
I will start, and then please jump in, Jael and Laura. I really think one of the most powerful things you can do is talk to your friends, neighbors, relatives about your support for reproductive freedom, and emphasize that, you know, the threat is very real right now. I think with the Supreme Court taking up this case, there is a real sense of urgency around protecting reproductive freedom, protecting abortion rights, and even more broadly, protecting access to contraception. And the more that folks that support reproductive freedom talk to their relatives and their friends about that support, I think there is power in, you know, talking about this collectively, taking action collectively, writing to your congresspeople in a group about your support for reproductive freedom. And I know this is something Laura works on every single day, so I will pass it to her to see if she has anything else to add.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Christina. Beautiful question. I love questions about how do we take action. So I think what Christina outlined is a critical first step. Who is in your social circle? Who's in your neighborhood? Who's at your community center? How do we start having compassionate conversations with folks that may be on the fence? And how do we have uplifting conversations with folks, the 7 out of 10 Americans who support reproductive health care that may not be involved yet and may not have taken action yet? The second piece of that is we offer ample ways and opportunities to get involved through our virtual events. And most of our virtual events have a call to action piece to them, whether it's a policy briefing or a summit or a 101 event. We typically run call to actions through our virtual events so people can get both educated about where we are in policy development and advocacy and what they can do in real time to take action in terms of where we're at. So just again, re-upping virtual events as well as the upcoming activist summit are some next immediate moves that folks can make to get more plugged in.
Okay, I think that's great. Anne, do you want to wrap this call up for us?
I think I can wrap it up. Well, we definitely have our marching orders, and it starts with signing up for this very exciting summit at the end of the month. I think that's going to be really helpful. And I'm going to take Laura up on her offer to help us with some materials to so that when we all go home, we're all going home now to visit our families in the summer and then in the fall around the Thanksgiving dinner table. We're going to talk to our family members in a compassionate way and do some serious talk, since 7 out of 10 of us are in agreement on that issue. So I would like to thank all of you who've joined us on the call today. And I hope that it's been as exciting for you as it has been for me. And the GWC Reproductive Justice Team is working hard on many fronts to protect our rights. So please watch out for more calls to action from this amazing team. And in closing, I'd like to give a big shout out to all of our great volunteers, both on camera and behind the scenes, and let everyone know on the call know that all of our GWC teams would love to have your help. We have teams in place around the ERA and violence against women, economic empowerment, feminist literature, and many more. So please consider stepping up as a volunteer. We'll put our link in the chat box for volunteering. And I'd like to add also that your support goes a long way. So please also consider donating. We'll put that link in the chat box too, so that we can continue to bring events like this to Americans around the world. It's not an easy task to do that. And even the smallest donation can help. So with that, I'd like to really thank our guests, and we'll follow up on all these things. And thanks to all of you for being there. And I hope that you'll join us for events in the future. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Nice afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are.
Thank you all
Bye,
so much.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ending the live stream.